Welcome to Trash Bag Digest, a podcast we expect no one to listen to about consuming and creating stuff. I'm Iliad, that's Marigold. We're two completely unqualified friends who are doing this just for fun.
Right, so we're going to talk first about what we've been doing, because it's been a while, so we've probably been doing different things, which is good.
Many different things, given the amount of time that has elapsed. Oh man, time is a mystery. I do not remember all the things. Oh wait, before this, I keep on thinking that we should probably introduce the topics before we go right into what we've been consuming media-wise. So, I'm just going to do that real quick. We're going to be talking about bad advice. Bad art and writing advice. That's why the one person that will ever listen to this, you know who you are, should continue listening to this, aside from the fact that you're our friend and have emotional ties. Anyway, you may continue.
I don't know, I got 57 followers now. Maybe one of them will watch it.
One can hope.
But yeah, so I finished reading the manga theory book by the creator of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. If you want good writing advice, I'd recommend it.
Nice.
Yeah, I've been using his advice while I've been reading manga, so I've been analyzing different manga. So I've been rereading Bleach, and I think I'm past the point where I dropped off the series originally.
Cool.
Yeah, and I'm also reading Chainsaw Man, although I'm a bit apprehensive because I'm at volume 3 and I don't think I like the direction it's going in, but...
Yeah, I mean, biggest danger of serialized media, I swear. But,
yeah. And I guess the most relevant, or not relevant, but the latest thing I've been listening to has been not a podcast, a lecture on the Black Death.
Ooh, metal.
Yeah, I'm like halfway through it now, and apparently they think gerbil fleas were part of the reason we got the plague, and also it sounds like there were 3 different viruses that struck Europe at the exact same time, and that's probably why it was so bad.
Cool.
Yeah, so we got like flea, buboes, as she calls it, plague, the bubonic one that shows up, but then you also had a pneumonia that shows up, and then you also had a blood infection one that like showed up.
Cool. Did you know that the Black Death is like maybe kind of sort of very indirectly responsible for my autoimmune disease?
Huh. No, we haven't gotten to that part of the lecture. I don't think I'll ever be mentioned in the lecture now that I think about it.
No, I mean probably not covered in the lecture about the actual historical stuff, but there's some evidence which suggests that certain autoimmune diseases show up with more prevalence in certain European populations because they helped protect from the Black Death.
Man, what a wild ride that is. Like, an autoimmune disorder both saved your life, but then causes issues to your descendants after.
Yeah, and I mean, technically it's like a little bit more complicated because it's like the benefit was not necessarily of the autoimmune disease, it's more like the quirks of the autoimmune system in the extreme form become the autoimmune diseases. That's also why women, they think, have more autoimmune diseases than men, is because in order to like grow another human inside of your body, women's immune systems are just whack. And in that extreme form, it's more likely to become an autoimmune disease, just in general.
Well, something else that's kind of interesting to kind of circle that drain there. Did you know that there is some Europeans who are immune to HIV/AIDS, and it's linked to the Black Death?
Yeah, I think I actually had heard of this. It's been like 2 people now, like 2 people who've been confirmed immune.
Right? It's a crazy quirk because in reality there was no HIV/AIDS at the time, and yet they're immune to it, and they're like, well, what part of the Black Death caused that? And there's still a lot of questions going on, but it's really fascinating how like 3 different plagues just swept up and like murdered like 85% of the population.
History, man, it's important.
Yeah, and that's what I've been listening to. Listening to it in my car.
Nice. Speaking of history, I've been listening to my own little history thing. 99% Invisible is doing a book club this year on the Power Broker, and I thought, you know what is my kind of world building? Is like learning more about realpolitik. So I'm doing the Power Broker book club with 99% Invisible about Robert Moses, who was the New York City park planner, who sounds like that sounds like an innocent job, but it turns out this guy like ran the state of New York for 4 decades with an innocuous job title.
I've heard of him.
Yeah.
I think Lindsay Ellis mentioned him.
Yeah. You get the feeling actually when you learn about him that he's the guy that Donald Trump is trying to be. Donald Trump hasn't built shit compared to Robert Moses. Robert Moses displaced so many minorities and like reshaped the coastline. But so I'm just like, you know, I'll be reading this book all year. I got the audiobook through an Audible 1-month trial. So I'll be reading that all year. I gotta say, I think the author, I'm blanking on his name. His last name is Caro. I think his first name is Robert Caro. I really hope I got that right. I mean, if not, look it up. Really great prose. Incredible writer. I just want to dissect it like a bug. So I'm really enjoying that as well. Like, this is a monster of a book. Extremely convoluted, like so much is in there. And the way he crams so much information into sentences and goes back and forth in time using grammar is just like admirable. Really enjoying that.
Man, if only we were historically relevant enough to have like a giant ass book written about our machinations.
No, like this guy has written 1 book on Robert Moses, and then he's written 5 books on Lyndon B. Johnson. And that's his entire book writing career.
Obviously, we are not doing enough crazy stuff to warrant a 5-book dissection in our psychology.
I mean, to be honest, I'm not sure I want to be studied with the intensity that this guy studies people. I do think at some point I wanna like go through and dissect some of his sentences, word for word. I'm like, what are you doing? What is your magic? What conjunctions are going on there?
Well, technically, that is a good way to increase your craft. Here's some good advice before we go into the bad one. Analyze stuff you're reading to figure out how it works.
Yeah, even though I'm listening to the audiobook, I did get my brother a physical copy for Christmas because he likes books, and even if he never reads it, I mean, he does have now like a full-on door stopper, like an actual murder weapon in the hard copy.
Nice.
So I can like photocopy a couple pages to work from to like break down some sentences. And aside from that, I've been having just a month of migraines. So I've been learning how to meditate through real force of, if I think thoughts, the migraines get worse. Luckily they aren't that bad anymore, but like, wow, what a way to discover how to not think.
Forced meditation.
Yeah, I still hate meditation, but like, good to know I can in fact do it as long as I listen to podcasts at double speed. But yeah, no, I've been really into like, I've been listening to so many freaking literacy podcasts. And now I've been buying some of the books on the topic. Hopefully soon I'll be able to get more into them. And like, brain go burr with words. It's good I'm starting to be able to like read more again, because I have just about run dry on the podcasts.
I mean, I've been siphoning off that knowledge, so
Yeah, it's fun. But I mean, other than that, I haven't really been up to a whole heck of a lot lately.
yeah, see, now's a good time to mention I was playing video games.
Yeah, video games are fun. We have been playing Stardew Valley together. That's been fun.
I've been playing Pokemon Mystery Dungeon DX as well. And that's a game that I played when I was like 8, and I'm replaying it, and can I just say something?
Yes, of course, it's your podcast.
Well, no, the only thing I want to say is I played that game when I was 8, and it is definitely a game I could have only played when I was 8 because the story is so bad. I'm sitting there and I'm like,
See, I was trying to remember, is that the one with the bad storyline? Because one of the mystery dungeons has a storyline where by the end of it I was rooting for the bad guys.
no, this it's just got bad stunted writing, kind of like they were trying to figure out they were trying to rush through the plot kind of deal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the one with bad writing for me was the Infinity Gates to Infinity one. Because that one was the definition of rushed. Like in this game, it's like very. If Gates of Infinity had a lot of dialogue that said nothing, this game has dialogue that just gets to the point and then keeps going. It's like, oh no, my son is missing. Go rescue my son. And then you go outside and you're like, yeah, this guy broke into my house and asked me to rescue his son. And then he comes back up and he's like, yes, rescue my son. Here he is. Here's the floor. Please go do this. Leaves. And then you're like, okay. So you go do it. You go to rescue the kid. He's over a cliff and you're like, okay, well, how are we going to save him? Oh, hey, these Magnites you saved in the last round of story? Yeah, they're going to miraculously show up, save the kid. Here's a little funny dialogue about Diglets having feet, and now they want to join your rescue squad. Okay, here's how you do the next mechanic.
I do feel like video game writing has in general evolved since we were kids.
It definitely has. Now we have more story, I think.
Well, then just like better integration of like story and video game mechanics.
Yeah.
All right. On to the main topic.
Yo-ho, brush, let's all lather, boys, whichever you've the notion.
50 cents for shaving cream, $1 for the lotion.
Old Spice means quality, said the captain to the bosun. So look for the package with the ship that sails the ocean. Yo-ho, 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 yo-ho.
All right, after that wonderful ad break that I totally have planned, yes. yes.
Yes, of course. Well, we're gonna start off our main topic of terrible art advice by like not yet talking about the terrible art advice, but another pet peeve of mine, which is something that goes hand in hand with terrible art advice: sales funnels and how to recognize them, because not enough people know about these. So a sales funnel is a common marketing tactic used by literally everyone, including good reputable services. But people should know what they look like because they're also used by total scam artists. And it's basically when a business offers a free service or free information as a way to get your attention, and then they offer you another free service, usually in exchange for some of your information, like, say, your email address. And then once they have that, they'll offer you a service for a nominal fee, or like a cheap class, or something on sale. And then once you've signed up for that, they'll start offering you the stuff they actually want to sell you once they've gotten you to that level of investment. But the first stuff you'll come across is their free stuff, because that's the stuff that won't turn you off right away. So that's the mouth of the sales funnel. And so much advice that you'll find for like art or writing online is the mouths of sales funnels. And this goes for reputable channels like Proco, Marco Bucci, I think is the name of a channel. Hopefully I didn't butcher that, right?
There's some Twitch streamers who also do something similar.
Yeah, right. But like Proco's a good example because their main business is not the YouTube channel. Their main business is their private course website. But it also goes for like so many Tumblr writing advice blogs I've seen, where you like go to their main Tumblr page and like, oh, would you look at that? They're like offering you free workbooks if you just give them your email and sign up for their newsletter. That's a sales funnel. And where it gets really dubious is if the advice they're giving in the mouth of the sales funnel is bad. If the stuff they're giving away is like really generic advice that you can find for free, it generally means they're not very good at their jobs. Because if they're being so precious about what they're giving away for free, it means that, like, in my opinion, the stuff they're selling can't be that great. Or they wouldn't be so precious about what they're monetizing. Just, fair warning about sales funnels, how to recognize them, and how they relate to bad advice, because they are major purveyors of the stuff.
Okay, so since I'm the one who probably has the most for art advice, I guess I'll start with my first one. In terms of annoyance. So the first one, it's a little annoying, but I could live with it. And then it goes down by levels of how much it irritates me.
Okay.
So my first one is art tips with no explanation. Have you ever seen those do this, don't do that, and all you have is like two different images, one with an X and one with a check mark? And you're sitting there and you're like, okay, what is this supposed to teach me actually? Like, why is one good and one bad?
Yeah, and it's like purely stylistic. Well, or even if it's not stylistic, you can't tell if you're below a certain level. So it's not really advice. It's just like showing off at that point even.
Right? It's not advice. There's no explanation. And frankly, it's kind of worthless. Like, its existence is pointless if you were to get down to it. Yeah, no, it's so bad. It's so annoying. It's not even going to teach you anything. Then after that level, I find don't ever use blank. So, like, don't ever shade with purple or black or blue, or don't use this line art tool. Don't do that. Don't do this. And then it's like, always, 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 there's somebody else who uses it to a great effect.
Yeah, I definitely feel like this is like suffering from context collapse, where like someone has like seen one thing in one situation that like really bugs them, and then they've just decided that this is like a universal rule and like puts it out on the internet, and it's like it's not a universal rule, actually. It just isn't.
Like, I understand from one angle, like, if you over rely on, like, say, shading with black, you're never gonna really learn about color theory. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't shade with black. It just means you should practice shading with other colors so that you can understand what you're doing, and then you can shade with black.
Yeah, like over-reliance on any one technique is going to cause problems.
Yeah, diversify your portfolio, figure out what works for you, and then go back, and then go with that,
And I will also just add here, because this is going to be a running theme with all of my stuff. Personally, as someone who is a super black and white thinker that really, really struggles with like dogmatic advice, anything that's framed as like don't ever, anything that's framed without context as just these like quick little dictums. It's one thing if this is happening in like an in-person thing where you can clarify what you're actually meaning. But as soon as you're putting advice out online where it's going to be stripped of all context and passed around, you really owe it to like clarify what you mean by don't ever. Because someone like me comes along and it does like horrible things to my brain because I hear don't ever shade with black and I hear don't ever shade with black, not whatever nuanced take you actually meant by that when you first said it in like your in-person group with 3 students that all had one very specific problem.
Shading with black, most likely. Like, it comes up so often. I mean, I kind of understand why it showed up. It's because when you're starting out and you're young at, like, say, 10 years old, you see shadows and you think black. So, obviously, when you say don't shade with black, you're kind of talking to them. But, like, it's just, it's not don't ever. It's practice, practice, practice.
It applies to a specific stage in someone's art journey. And I do think that if you're going to like put it up on Twitter or put it up on Instagram, like it is possible to specify that actually.
Yeah. Okay, this one was on a podcast with artists who were like discussing art tips, and I was flabbergasted that this was on like one of their advice, and it angered me so much.
Ooh.
And I don't think people will fully grasp it, but like I'm gonna have to add an asterisk here after I say what it is. Like I'm gonna explain it. Don't jump down my throat before like I explain myself, okay? But yeah, it's don't trace art.
Oh yeah, this one I've seen so much discourse on this one.
The thing is, and this is why it angered me, okay? They were like, well, maybe trace people, but don't trace art. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, but if I'm doing an art study, tracing the art to some extent can help with that, especially if I'm just studying colors.
This is another one where like it really, really, really matters what the F you actually mean by the word trace.
Yeah, in this case, they mean like literally tracing.
Well, like, for instance, when I was in high school, I had a friend who really liked to draw and was, like, in the very beginning stages of learning. And a lot of her drawings were, like, very literally outline tracings. She would go through comic books she liked, and she would find panels she liked, and she would put a piece of printer paper over top a character she liked, and she would trace the line of that character, right? And she'd like trace their pose and trace their hair and trace their clothes. And like, unsurprisingly, she ran into problems where like those drawings where she lifted directly by outline the major elements of that drawing directly by tracing from the comics, those drawings turned out way better than what she could do by eye or when she was trying to draw from imagination. And like it kind of held her back because anytime she wanted a cool drawing, she would just go to trace. And like people like that exist. I think the original advice somewhere back at the beginning of the game of telephone probably referred to those people. But because no one ever effing specifies what they mean by tracing, now, anytime you draw any kind of line over any kind of pre-existing image, suddenly that's tracing, regardless of if you're tracing the outlines or not, or what purpose you're tracing for.
Like, the thing is, I totally understand the whole don't trace to steal or take art as yours, but for me, I trace over poses to get the shapes down, and then I put that in a separate tab so I can reference the broken down bits of the image because I get lost in the sauce, as it were. And depending on what I'm trying to do or learn from a particular image, it's more economical for me sometimes to just kind of lightly trace over to, because my goal isn't to understand how the artist drew anatomy, it's to understand how they use color and brushes and that stuff, right? So, like, if I was trying to figure out how they stylized, then obviously, again, I would trace over to break it down.
Yeah, like in a lot of your studies, you're doing tracing because you're trying to figure out what the F is going on with the style. So like I don't know, this is another one of these ones where like sometimes it's valid and sometimes it's not, but only in the context of like, did you specify what you mean by the word tracing?
Yeah, no, this was like a total condemnation in the podcast, and I was just like, my guy, my dude, what are you saying? Okay, and this is the last one. Monetize your art, go into an art field, or turn your love of art into a career. Which, first of all, it's a bit late for me to do that, if I'm honest. But secondly, I can't imagine a faster way for a newbie like me, or maybe I'm intermediate now. Either way, I can't think of a faster way to kill art than by monetizing it.
Yeah. See, my problem is that, like, full disclosure, I have a business degree. So, like, whenever anyone, not just with this, but like with my other hobbies, art is not the worst one for this. The worst one for this is like effing knitting. Whenever anyone asks me, like, oh, have you thought of selling that? The answer is yes. I can put together a business plan in my effing sleep. But, like, not everything makes a good product. You know, people will say, like, oh, sell it. Calculate how many hours it took for you to make and, like, what the wage you want is, and then that's how much you should charge for it. That's a good starting point. But, like, the next step is, will someone pay for that? Will someone pay that amount of money for that piece of art? No. The other thing is, whatever you just decided your art is worth, double the price because you haven't accounted for the labor that goes into maintaining the business and the admin costs. And your art also has to pay for that. They won't pay double what you just decided your art was worth? Not worth selling.
Yeah. And then it gets to, like, be a whole thing, and then, like, you try to cater to certain demographics, and then you get so lost in, like, all the business details and trying to appeal to other people to make money, and
Unless people are already trying to throw money at you, don't do it.
yeah, so throw money and then I'll, like, make you I don't know, what's a random drawing I can make people? If you throw money at me, I will draw you Donkey from Shrek.
Yeah, but unless people are already telling you they will pay you, unless people are already throwing money at you, don't bother. Unless you're really desperate, but, like, try not to be that desperate.
No. I'm saying that if somebody gave me, I don't know, $100, I will draw them Shrek and Donkey.
Well, the offer's out there, folks. All right, and now my chief art complaint. I found in general, I will say, art advice online is of a much higher caliber than writing advice, because we will get to my issues with writing advice.
Oh, yeah.
But one piece of advice that I really loathe, in both writing and in art, so I'm talking about it in art, is practice every day. Again, I'm a very dogmatic thinker. I take things literally. When I hear practice every day, I hear practice every day. And, like, to me, that advice is just setting people up for failure. Practice every day is hard. Life happens.
It makes me feel guilty when I don't practice every day. Like yesterday, I did not draw at all, and I felt a little bit bad about it. But it's like, I was tired. I couldn't draw seals yesterday.
Yeah, well, and, like, practice every day. It literally killed my ability to write for years because I built up so much toxic guilt that every time I did sit down to write, it would be like, well, you're horrible for all the days you didn't write. So, like, when I started drawing, I very deliberately was, like, ignoring that advice. Don't worry about practicing every day. And what I found when I did that is that practicing every day is for the birds. It literally doesn't matter. In fact, learning doesn't happen while you're doing it. Right? The learning happens in the resting, right? It's not like, you're filling up a gauge while you draw. Your brain is rewiring, not while you're drawing, but while you're not drawing. So, like, for muscle memory purposes. For muscle, not muscle memory purposes, but for, like, because drawing engages muscles, and your muscles can kind of get, like, out of practice, there's going to be a certain amount of time where if you go more than, like, 2-3 days without drawing, you'll feel that. You'll feel like you're kind of stiff and out of practice. But, like, as long as you're practicing more days than not, you'll be fine. And even if you go more than that, you just have to build up a couple of days of momentum and you'll be back to where you were before. And a lot of my biggest jumps in drawing have come after long breaks. So, yeah. Practice every day. So yeah, I hate the advice practice every day. You know, I've replaced it with consistency is king. You'll make the most progress when you're being consistent. But that doesn't have to be every day.
Even to jump off of that a little bit, even everybody's like, well, you want to draw 8 hours a day or something ridiculous like that. Honestly, all you need is 10 to 5 minutes. Like, you're not going to get crazy progress, but sometimes 10 to 5 minutes, if that's all you can spare a day, just even getting that in, you're still going to improve.
Yeah, just enough to get your brain thinking about it. Because again, you're not actually improving while you are drawing. You are improving while you are not drawing, because that is when your brain is doing the rewiring. So the practice is just to teach your brain what you want it to do.
You are the control. Well, okay, you're not always in control of your brain, but you can hack your brain to do art. Is kind of the moral of the lesson.
Yeah, plasticity, baby. All right, now we're into the writing advice section, which is where I feel most passionately about everything.
I have a few, so that way I don't just sit here like a bump on a log, but I'm not going to. I'm going to let you go first because I know this is where your passions lie, so I'm going to let you do the first 3, I think.
Okay, well, I will say, some of these aren't so much advice as like general trends I dislike that are related to advice. So I'm going to start with the one that bothers me the absolute most, which is trance state writing. This is kind of related to the specific exercise of autonomic writing, which is where you just like sit down and write literally whatever comes to mind. And I don't think that's a bad exercise to do, to just like practice getting into the flow of things. I think it's like a terrible way to try and write a novel.
Yeah, I've tried to use it to write a novel, and I have to say I don't recommend it. It is not. It's very incohesive.
And the really bugs me, okay, is it's like it turns out to be one of these things, as far as I can tell, where it's like meditation and yoga, and that it's one of these things that's actually a spiritual practice that no one tells you is a spiritual practice.
Gonna say, I feel like that's like the when we were talking about art advice, that's the whole things get lost in the game of telephone.
Yeah, because it turns out that, like, as far as I can tell, the first people to do this kind of automatic writing were actually like spiritists, like spiritualists. You know, like Madame Blavatsky types, who were using automatic writing to channel the dead and spirits from higher dimensions and other planes.
Yes, I could kind of see how that would work.
Yeah, where they thought that when they just sort of emptied their mind and like opened themselves up in this way to just sort of writing whatever first popped into their head, that those thoughts weren't even their own thoughts, they were the thoughts of beings flowing through them. And like, I think that when you understand that history, you can sort of understand how absolutely this is completely disempowering to artists as a creative tool. And you can see how people get trapped in this idea that like their characters are controlling their narrative, if they are relying on trance states to write their stories for them.
Yeah, it suddenly becomes like they are the vessels for their characters' will, and not like they're the ones who came up with their characters or the scenario.
Yeah, and like again, like if people want to use this as an exercise to like generate ideas or get out of writer's block, that's one thing. But like, I think this is more commonly causing writer's block because like this isn't going to generate a cohesive plot for most people. This is just not how the brain works. And all evidence points to trance states not actually connecting you to divine beings. So unless you want to be doing this as a like religious practice, I think people should seriously be second guessing using it for their creative endeavors and should be seriously side-eyeing any advice that promotes it or any sort of memes that like suggest that yes, this is the normal way of writing things. Because I see a lot of those. I'm like collecting them in a folder. They're distressing. I feel bad for people. So like that's my first big one. Had to get it off my chest.
All right, what's your second one?
The next one I have on my list is Write What You Know. So I think there's a version of this that is like not bad because like background knowledge is important. I think where it gets people into trouble is like, again, it's like it sounds quippy, but like what does it mean in context? Because like I remember being 10 years old and hearing the advice. Well, I think I was like technically 13, okay? But like I remember being 13 years old and hearing Write What You Know and being like, I don't know shit. What do I write about? Really specifically, again, being hyper literal, it's like, well, I want to write a character who knows archery. I have no access to archery classes. At that age, the internet was not what it is now. I do think that like all the resources people make for writers now on like a writer's guide to archery or writer's guide to poisons, like these are good things, but they didn't exist for me at that age. And I was like, so I just can't write characters who know archery because I don't know archery? It's not that writing what you know is a bad thing or taking that into account. I think, one, you should write what you care about. Two, how important it is to get the details right, it sort of depends on how important it is to the story. If the archers are way off in the distance on one battle, like it doesn't matter nearly as much as if your main character is an archer and the entire story is about them in the archery corps.
Oh yeah.
And then also, the kind of details you need to know to be able to write are important to understand. Because, like, you can fake knowledge about a subject in writing pretty well if you can pick up the vocabulary about that writing and understand how people talk about it. And that doesn't necessarily mean going to archery classes. That might mean watching a couple of videos about archery, watching a couple of archery competition videos, and like picking up the lingo about how people talk, learning the terminology for the different parts of the bow, and then like using that in your story.
Oh, but you do want to be careful, as the creator of JoJo pointed out, there will always be somebody who will actuallys you. You will get that letter if you're not careful enough.
Yeah. I mean, this is going into my personal philosophy, but my personal philosophy is is like, that's fine. Right? Is if the only people who can tell that you're wrong about archery are professional archers, then like, that's a tiny percentage of the population. And that's obviously like a personal opinion. So if you really, really care about getting everyone right, that's okay. That's like kind of a recipe for burnout, in my opinion.
Unless you're like really into archery, in which case it's a special interest.
Yeah, like if you enjoy this process, that's one thing. But again, as someone who was hyper literal, it's like I couldn't start writing anything because I felt like I needed to know everything about archery and medieval warfare as a 13-year-old before I could write a medieval fantasy book. And you don't. You can set the parameters for these things.
Which is ironic because I've read a lot of medieval fantasy books and they're pretty light on the medieval.
And you can fake it pretty well for the majority of the population by, like, copying the language. Especially if it's not going to be central to the plot. So, work smarter, not harder when it comes to, like, write what you know. And that actually leads into the third thing that I'll just talk about here. Writers should be experts in everything. This is something I disagree with strongly. The idea that anyone from any background should be able to pick up your book and never be able to tell what your own interests are, what your own specialties are, what you know and don't know about. The idea that a heart surgeon, a Geneva Convention's torture specialist, a lawyer, an archer, an equine surgeon, that all of these people could, like, pick up your book and come away believing that you're an expert in their respective fields. I think honestly that's kind of expecting too much of writers, to be honest. I think people should be allowed to pick, especially when it comes to the fact that TradPub is changing, right? Even in TradPub, fiction writers are not getting the same kind of editorial support they used to get. A lot of writers are now turning to self-pub, where they are, again, not getting every piece of editorial support. They have to pay the money for themselves. So expecting to hold writers to that kind of high standard, where any expert from anywhere in the world, where you could be dealing with, like, I don't know, Chinese historical experts and child development experts. The idea that every single detail of your world has to be perfectly verisimilitudinous to anyone who might pick up your book, regardless of their level of expertise in any given subject, or you have somehow failed as a writer, is, I think, a really, really high bar to set, an unreasonably high bar to set in this day and age.
I don't know, sometimes, like, hyper-realism can get in the way of the fun. Like, if I wrote way too realistically about what happens to a character because I know they can't realistically survive an explosion, and then I write about all the months it takes for them to recover from an accident in great laborious detail, it kind of also slows down the action.
And, like, personally, as someone who, like, reads a lot of Chinese web novels where they do not take this stance with writing, I enjoy being able to tell what a writer cares about. Tells me as a reader what I should be caring about. Like, oh, they have clearly no idea, like, the very basic functioning of how a hospital works. Cool. Hospitals are not going to be super important to this story. Oh, this person clearly cares a lot about the detailed minutia of office politics. Cool, office politics, important to this story.
Yeah. You can tell a lot about an author based off of what they care about story-wise.
And, like, personally, I like that. Like, I do think that there's some level of research that should go into a story to support the themes of the story, the parts of the story that matter. When I was writing Werewolves Don't Wear Clothes, at some point I looked up whether or not bucks travel in groups. Because, like, a part of the story is about being outside in nature, And, like, I'm not an outdoorsy person. I wanted to make sure that, like, I got that detail right. Because if I had got that detail wrong, I'd have felt the character in that scene was connecting to nature and they had got that major detail wrong. But, like, I didn't research a historical time period because I was deliberately going for pastiche. So, no, I did not consider the firearm that was being used in the story. I just used generic terms the whole way through. Personally, I think that should be fine. And authors should be able to choose a level of engagement. But the expectation, the bar has been set so high now, at a time when authors have less support than ever to meet that bar.
That actually makes me think of one of the bad writing tips I gouged from the internet. that actually ties into that, which is everything is there because the creator wished it to be there.
Oof.
And all of this talk, right, about like intentionality and like how much research should you go into a work, right? That just made me think of that particular writing advice, because the thing is, not everything is there because the creator wanted it to be there.
That just sort of, yeah, no. Like, not every typo is there because the creator wanted it to be there.
Plus with scenes too, right? Like that, like the aforementioned, the author clearly doesn't know anything about hospitals. Well, yeah, the author clearly doesn't know anything about hospitals, but like, can we say, I don't know what my point is. I'm losing my point.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we want to get like really spicy, right? Like, part of the point is like, again, to get like overly literal in bad faith, is like, that's like saying that if an author has a racist stereotype in there, they intended to be racist. It could not possibly be that they picked up on that stereotype from media in their childhood and never had it corrected and didn't realize it was racist. They must have willfully been like trying to perpetuate racism against X group. And like, obviously racist stereotypes are a bad thing, but treating everyone who perpetuates them like a willful enemy is, well, you'll catch more flies with honey than with vinegar.
I mean, the thing too about like certain cultural trends is they're kind of insidious in that you don't realize just what kind of like stranglehold it might have on you, just because it's so perpetuated in the culture you live in. There are some things where they just exist in your culture, and if it never gets pointed out, you just never realize that you've been pushing a bad idea.
Yeah, like, I don't know, you can open a book from like 300 years ago and it's like, oh, they were wrong about dinosaurs. That's in there because they were intentionally wrong about dinosaurs. Like, I don't know. Like, it's true that there's a lot of intentionality in what authors do, but like, that's just begging for bad faith readings on the part of readers, and it's putting a lot of pressure on authors to like be overly scrupulous with their works. So yeah, bad advice. What's the next one?
Oh, okay. Let's see. Writing a relationship based on a dynamic or trying to get a particular trope into the story is a bad idea. Don't do it ever.
I feel like these are two very different things, right? Like, trying to shoehorn something into an existing story can be tricky. But like, everyone's got to start somewhere. This idea that like, again, it's like back to this like spiritist thing. This idea that stories just come to us out of the ether fully formed is like not true. They're all inspired by something. And if that's by a trope, that's like totally fine.
Honestly, if you're writing like, I don't know, fan fiction, if I were to go from like the angle of fan fiction, writing for a dynamic is fine sometimes. Like if you're writing a one shot, yeah, go for it. Why is it a bad idea to write for a dynamic? It's a one shot,
Not even just one shots. Like, both of my novellas are like about dynamics. Like, Perfect Medicine is like, what if you had a chronically ill alpha? And Werewolves Don't Wear Clothes is, what if I took this one fairy tale I read and I made it Danmei?
Yeah, it's kind of like, I think everybody writes for a dynamic. It's just not as obvious sometimes.
Yeah, I do find trope discourse insufferable, largely because of the arbitrary distinctions people draw between what they consider tropes and what they don't consider tropes. And this is like a good example. Because like, heroic dynamics are also dynamics. You just don't call them that because they don't show up in fanfic as often.
Yeah. Okay, this one is a really stupid writing piece advice that I like I said, I scrounged around for bad writing threads, so okay. Limit your straight, white, and cis characters to one of each.
Okay, that's just stupid and arbitrary.
If you only are allowed one guy, then that just makes it a harem?
No, I don't, it doesn't even make sense to me, because, like, I don't know. This just really depends on the particular kind of story you're writing. Like, this person is really assuming people are writing very particular kinds of stories with very particular kinds of casts.
I think the idea is to break your habit of writing cis normative characters.
I mean, I guess, but, like, it's kind of presumptive that people's writings need to do that, eh?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's writing their own stories, so, like, do you really need one of each?
Yeah, and then, like, it's kind of unclear how it breaks down, right?
Oh, that's true, because, like, let's say I do write a story with one cis character, one guy character, because then I couldn't have, like, if I'm only allowed one male character, then that wouldn't mean I couldn't have trans male characters, or a large cast of trans male.
Or can you have, like, multiple, like, the math on here isn't checking out. And then, like, also, for instance, like, my stories both have very small casts. And, like, also, when werewolves don't wear clothes, part of the point is that patriarchal society, where men can inexplicably get married, but ignore that part, because that's just, like, I don't know, my excuse.
Fantasy.
Yeah, right? But, like, if everyone in there, if everyone in that story is, like, not cis or male, like, it completely destroys the tension of Noelle's inner conflict. And then I don't even know what you do with an ABO story.
I guess it would be a female-centric ABO?
I don't know. Do you count all the alphas as male?
I feel like that would be its own discussion, honestly. Are alphas men? Or do they just reproduce?
I don't know. Bad, cursed discourse. Honestly, terrible advice.
Okay, do we just want to do one more?
If we're only going to cover one more, I wanna cover one of another one I hate.
Or do we want to do two more? I'm gonna leave you to decide. Do we do two more, or do we end with yours? Because I think we should end with
Okay,
yours.
well, let's do two more. I'll do one of mine, and then we can do one of yours. How about that?
Oh, I think we should end with yours. I think yours would be better than the ones I got.
Okay, well, we'll do one more of yours then, and then we'll end on mine.
Okay. The middle point of a story is the best time to get a main couple together.
See, I don't even really want to discuss this one because it just betrays a complete... Someone's talking out of their ass. They've never analyzed a story.
The thing that gets to me, though, is it's like the middle of a story, as if, like, people aren't writing romances where the couple is already together at the start of the story and the relationship breaks down, or, like, people aren't writing a romance, or, like...
But, like, the thing that boggles my mind, Iliad, okay, with this one is, like, let's take it for granted that they are talking about, like, capital R romance, okay?
Okay.
There is a book called Romancing the Beat that tells you exactly how to write capital R romance, because capital R romance is an extremely formulaic genre, okay? And, like, honestly, even if you don't read Romancing the Beat, which breaks down exactly how to write a capital R romance, beat by beat, You just have to read a couple of those suckers to realize that, like, where the sex scene is when the couple gets together, like, all of these things happen practically by the page. Like, it is extremely specifically paced, that genre. And the couple does not get together halfway through the book.
That's when the sex scene happens.
No, the sex scene does not happen halfway through the book. It happens a little bit later than halfway through the book.
It depends on the story.
There's a little bit of wiggle room, but, like, from what I remember, it's like, if you compare, it's like, it's not exactly halfway. It's slightly further than halfway.
True. That's how they build up the tension, right?
Yeah, halfway is a weird place, like, structurally, to, like, it's not a great moment for tension, right? Like, symmetry and tension are always at odds. Really, the sex scene, always, in fact, in capital R romance, the sex scene is slightly after the halfway point. But that's not when the couple gets together, because they'll always have a conflict after the sex scene that sets their relationship back.
Yeah, they gotta have that moment of tension. The audience just got their moment of relief, but now they've got a conflict.
So, like, whoever is giving this advice just simply, structurally, has not looked at a book before. Okay, now for my big one.
Yeah, now for one that's actually interesting.
Just write the first draft and figure the rest out later.
I guess it depends on how good your first draft is.
I think the thing that bothers me about this advice, right? Because the thing is, there's always a version of these advice that can, like, be helpful to people. I think my problem is that, like, the people who hear this advice need to hear this advice, are the people who are struggling to write their first draft, right? And unless that is happening because of, like, time crunches, like, you just can't get to the computer, it's happening because of some kind of writing problem. You haven't figured out the characters, you're, like, just straight up really bad at the mechanics of writing. Like, there's some kind of issue that's preventing you from, like, getting the first draft done. And, like, whatever that issue is, it's not gonna go away once the first draft is completed. I think this is one of the things I hate about NaNoWriMo. Is because it's like, oh, the hardest part of writing a novel is, like, the first 50,000 words. But you can write 50,000 words and not remotely have a novel. Yes, you have to write a first draft in order to get a novel out. But, like, if the first draft is the hard part for you, is the torture, is the pulling teeth, you're having a problem pre the first draft that, like, will not go away if you can just get over the hard part. There is something preventing you from writing the first draft. And it may be, like, your grammar and spelling are, like, holding you back from being able to write fluently. It may be that you don't like the story you're writing anymore. It may be that you need to do more plotting. It may be that you need to find more of a way to carve out time for your writing. Like, I have no idea, but, like, if the first draft is, like, torture, finishing the first draft is going to leave you a mess. If you're relying on the trance method to write, and you need inspiration every time you sit down to do anything, your first draft is going to be a ridiculous mess and may never cohere into anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really hate this advice that you just need to finish the first draft and then everything will be fine. Because if you're despairing at the first draft, there is a problem at that stage that ideally you should be able to fix at that stage, instead of just thinking that everything will be over once you're done.
The first draft of a book written and I've never gone back to it. Like, the first draft is technically there and it's been done, but I just, for whatever reason, I just don't want to write it and edit it and get it.
Like, and it's happened to me too, right? It's like you push through, or you give up. You can't finish the first draft, right? But, like, whatever was causing problems with the first draft, it doesn't, like, magically go away just because you finish the first draft. Either it stops you from writing the first draft or it doesn't. But it doesn't go away magically because you finished the first draft, if you do. Like, you're better off stopping and addressing the issue you have. Either it's that you hate the story, or that you're having issues with your writing, or you need to plot it out first. The idea that as long as you write the first draft, you can fix it all in the second draft, I think it kills a lot of stories.
I think for some people it is good advice, but I don't think it's universal advice, and I don't think it's necessarily good for first-time writers.
Well, some people, they really just need the confidence, like, your words are worth hearing. And, like, that is always true even if you're bad at writing. Even if you're bad at writing, your words are worth hearing. And it's worth it to keep writing. But, like, if the problem is that the writing isn't fun, because, like, even if you're bad at writing, it should still be fun. You can have fun doing things you're bad at. Like, I think that's the difference.
Sometimes you can even be popular being bad at writing.
Yeah, so, like, I think that's the difference. If you're having fun writing, keep writing. You know, finish the first draft, whatever. Keep going, right? If you're not having fun, stop and reevaluate. You don't have to push through it. It won't get better if you're not having fun.
Instead, it'll just sit in your file folder, mocking you.
Well, and I will also say, you learn from every story you abandon. In my opinion. Every story you abandon makes you a better writer. And you'll do better on the next one. Is that a good note to end on? Any other final thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's actually really good point to end on, honestly. Like, I think, yeah, in terms of bad writing advice, I think it's pretty good.
Sounds good.
All right, well, thank you to anyone who listens this far.
Yes, and if anyone has listened this far, I have these on Archive of Our Own under Marigold is Peculiar.
And I have a chronic fear of people knowing who I am, so you will only know me from YouTube. Unless I come up with a comic, in which case I'll tell you, but for now my works are my own. All right. And leave a like and a comment if you ever make it this far.
Yes, leave a smiley face.